Two hostage videos have been published by Hamas and the Palestinian Islamic Jihad showing Israeli hostages held in severe malnutrition conditions. Fighting continues in the Gaza Strip. The Palestinian Health Ministry has reported that the death toll in Gaza has crossed 60,000. Meanwhile, Israel has declared humanitarian pauses in the fighting in Gaza, and Steve Witkoff has visited Gaza, promising relief and more aid to the Gaza Strip. This is the Israel-Palestine Report with Professor Alon Burstein. Let's dive in. On Thursday, July 31st, the Al-Quds Brigades, that is the military wing of the Palestinian Islamic Jihad, published a video showing the Israeli hostage Rom Braslavsky. This is the second video of Braslavsky that the group has published in the past 3 months, and it was reportedly filmed on July 20th, 2 days before the group said that they have lost contact with the unit that was guarding Braslavsky. Before I get into this video, I'm going to remind everyone, if you haven't yet, hit that subscribe button to stay up to date on all the recent developments in the war and in the region more broadly. The 6-minute video opens with images of Braslavsky watching television and seeing pictures and images of starving children in the Gaza Strip, before turning to pictures of him on the floor and images comparing his current state to previous muscular images of him before his captivity from before October 7th of 2023. Braslavsky himself then speaks in an extremely weak voice and breaks into tears almost in the first moment when he introduces himself to the camera. He states that he has been held captive for 1 year and 9 months by the Palestinian Islamic Jihad, and he is living in total torment as a result of the IDF's most recent military operations in the Gaza Strip, specifically naming the codename of that operation Gideon's Chariots. He says that his conditions have substantially worsened due to Israel's military activities, and that if in the past he was given a minimal amount of food and water, he now subsides on less than 1 liter of water per day, and states that in the past 2 days he has eaten 3 falafel balls and less than 1 plate of rice. Braslavsky states that he has gotten so weak that he cannot move around, and says that he has seen images of starving children in Gaza, that his captor's humanity has disappeared in response to Israel's loss of humanity, i.e. how Israel is treating the Palestinians has reflected on his treatment in captivity. He begs Israel to, quote, bring the humanity back to Gaza, end quote, and explicitly states that this has been going on for 4 months, suggesting at least that the conditions were worsened in response to the blockade of humanitarian aid that Israel imposed at the beginning of March. He repeatedly begs for food to be allowed into the Gaza Strip so that the hostages will be given some, and begs Israel again and again to bring him home and make his nightmare end. The video ends with Braslavsky writing a note in Hebrew begging for his release and seen crying while he is writing it, and signing the date of July 20th, 2 days before the Jihad reported that they had lost contact with the unit that was guarding him. This happened as the IDF invaded the central camps in Deir el-Balach. The Palestinian Islamic Jihad put out a notice saying that they have lost contact with the unit guarding Braslavsky and they have no knowledge of his fate. In the following 2 days, on August 1st and on August 2nd, the Al-Qassam Brigades, that is the military wing of Hamas, published a hostage video of the Israeli hostage Eviatar David. This is also the second video in which David appears. The first one was published on February 22nd of this year, when the group showed David as he witnessed another hostage being released during that hostage deal at the beginning of 2025. The group began by releasing a quote-unquote promo of the video on August 1st, which also showed David in an extreme situation of malnutrition as he is held in a tunnel, and the video then skips between the images of starving children in Gaza and David interchangeably, as the writing states that Israel has decided to starve everyone in the Gaza Strip, and the hostage get to eat what the rest of Gaza gets to eat. Then, on August 2nd, the group published a video that was 4 minutes and 45 seconds, focused on Eviatar David himself. The entire video takes place in the tunnel where David is being held, and it opens with him stating the date of the filming, July 27th, at 12 p.m. He states in the video that he has no idea if he will eat today, and says that the conditions have been dire with almost no food and no water for the past months. He states that he is losing weight daily, and as he speaks, the camera switches back to an older image showing hostages that were eating a better meal in the past, that is before the blockade was imposed on at the beginning of March. David states that he subsides almost solely on lentils and beans, and then for over a minute he goes through a monthly chart of July, showing the days when he ate something and the days when he received no food. Sometimes that was, according to that chart, for at least 3 days in a row. The video shows David receiving a small can of food from his captors and says that this is supposed to last for him for at least 2 days, before he turns to chastising Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu for abandoning the hostages, and says repeatedly that all the stories that he was brought up on about solidarity in Israel were a lie. At this point, the video turns to another scene showing David in that same tunnel, only this time he is digging as he is speaking, and he says that he is digging his own grave since he is becoming so weak that it is becoming clear to him that he is very likely going to die in that tunnel in the coming days. David concludes by saying that time is running out and that only those watching can stop this torment and bring him home. And then the video ends, like all Hamas hostage videos, with a statement in Hebrew, Arabic, and English stating that the hostages will only be brought home in a hostage deal. Then a fade out of an hourglass stating, quote, "Time is running out," end quote. Relating to the hostage negotiations more broadly, while the week began with some optimism with regards to returning to negotiations, by Wednesday both sides declared that negotiations are officially suspended. At the beginning of the week, both sides were sending signals about possibly restarting the talks, and specifically on July 27th, the Saudi Al-Hadith reported that Hamas informed the negotiating countries that it is willing to show more flexibility on some of the sticking points that relates to when Hamas gave its answer to negotiators, and Israel essentially walked out of negotiations. 2 days later, it was reported that despite the seeming stalemate, Israel also transmitted its response to Hamas's latest proposal, i.e. even though the sides are not officially still negotiating, Israel still gave its answer to see how things can be moved forward, outlining its own red lines and some of the sticking points. The following day, however, on July 30th, both sides hardened their positions, and negotiations essentially broke down yet again. Seemingly responding to internal political pressures in Israel as a result of concessions that were made on the humanitarian front, which I'll say I'm going to discuss later in this video, Israel reportedly gave Hamas an ultimatum on July 30th, stating that Hamas has to give a positive answer to the current proposal that Israel gave back in the coming days, and stating that if that does not happen, Israel will begin annexing territory in the Gaza Strip, i.e. changing the official borders and annexing territory to Israel, starting with the buffer zone that Israel is holding around the Gaza Strip, and then moving to areas in northern Gaza. Later that day, Al-Hadith quoted senior Hamas officials, stating that the movement informed negotiators that it is also suspending all negotiations due to the starvation in the Gaza Strip, and that it will return to the table only in exchange for an improvement in the humanitarian conditions. This breakdown in the negotiations led the special U.S. emissary to the region, Steve Witkoff, to travel to Israel on July 31st, where he met personally with Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu and also held a series of other meetings. While there were minimal leaks from the meeting between Witkoff and Netanyahu himself, there were rumors that Witkoff is coming to deliver a message from President Trump, essentially saying that the attempt to reach a more temporary phase deal has failed, and that the sides now have to move on to achieving a complete deal, the release of all hostages in one attempt, and an end to the war in exchange. Again, there were very little leaks from the meeting between Witkoff and Netanyahu. We don't know exactly what was said there. However, 2 days later, when Witkoff met with families of Israeli hostages on August 2nd, he reportedly echoed those statements from Trump, stating, quote, "We think that the negotiations have to change to an all-or-nothing situation. End the war and bring all 50 hostages home at the same time." And in a separate report in Israel's Haaretz, Witkoff also stated, quote, "Netanyahu is obligated to ending the war, and Hamas has also agreed to disarm," end quote. This message seemingly matches what was said by, quote, senior Israeli officials, which is usually codename for Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu, immediately after the meeting with Witkoff, when said senior Israeli official said an understanding is forming between Israel and the US that in light of Hamas's refusal, we have to move from platforms to release part of the hostages to platforms that will release all the hostages, dismantle Hamas, and demilitarize Gaza, end quote. So again, we have that statement from Witkoff saying that it should move to an all or nothing situation. And we also have statements from senior Israeli officials, i.e. Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu, stating that Israel and the United States are realizing that we have to move to a platform to release all the hostages. However, Israel is also adding the demands of a complete demilitarized Gaza and dismantling Hamas. Responding to this, on August 2nd, Hamas issued several statements, one of them saying that the group will not agree to disarm, quote, as long as the occupation exists, end quote, and a second statement stating, again, quote, Hamas will not disarm until the establishment of a Palestinian state with Jerusalem as its capital, end quote. So where do things stand right now? On the one hand, negotiations are officially at a complete stalemate and the teams have been recalled from Qatar. On the other hand, the United States appears to be increasing its pressure on Israel to look towards a more comprehensive deal that relates to a return of all the hostages and an end to the war, which I will say is far closer to Hamas's initial position. At the same time, the US seems to be in agreement, or I'll say at least not contradicting Israel publicly, that part of the terms for ending the war should be Hamas's disarming and also possibly dismantling, something that the group has thus far categorically refused. Likely we're going to see both sides come under monumental pressure in the coming days, Israel from the United States and Hamas from Qatar and Egypt, in order to resume negotiations and come back to the table, possibly to negotiate that final settlement or a ceasefire and end to the war. Obviously remains to be seen. We'll know more in the coming days. Meanwhile, alongside the hostage negotiations, fighting has continued in the Gaza Strip, with intensive IDF activity reported in the northern parts of Gaza, and Hamas carrying out increasingly offensive operations in the southern parts of the Strip. In the northern parts of the Gaza Strip, the IDF reported detonating a series of tunnels in the Beit Hanun area on July 27th, publishing a video showing the extent of that tunnel array. The military also reported locating substantial weapons caches that were hidden in a school in the Jabalia refugee camp area. This happened on July 28th, and intensive fighting was also reported in the areas of Zaytun and Sajaiya on July 29th. Substantial demolitions were reported in the areas of Zaytun on July 30th as well, and on July 31st, the Al-Qassam brigades reported firing RPGs at IDF vehicles in the Tufts region of Gaza City, that is in this more southern part of Gaza City over here, and a different attack involving snipers and mortars were also reported near the Al Akram region, also in Tufts in Gaza City. That same day, the IDF reported a battle that occurred in another tunnel network in the Beit Hanun region, when Hamas operatives were held up in a 2-kilometer tunnel that was relatively close to the Israeli border that reportedly had within it rooms, weapon storages, and explosives. The military published a video later in the day showing both the tunnel and illustrating its proximity to the Israeli border. In the southern parts of the Gaza Strip, substantial fighting was reported in the Abbasan region of Han Yunis, that is this eastern region of Han Yunis, on July 27th. Hamas published a video showing Al-Qassam operatives emerging from the tunnel and placing explosive devices on an IDF vehicle, leading to substantial detonations. According to the IDF report, that unit also threw explosive devices at another vehicle that also led to detonations. 2 soldiers were reportedly killed in that attack, and 2 others were injured in a different engagement, all in the Abbasan region. On July 28th, Hamas attempted to carry out another more daring offensive, as 2 operatives reportedly attempted to infiltrate an IDF resting site in the southern areas of Han Yunis. This style of more elaborate operations continued in the following days, and on July 31st, Hamas operatives attempted to carry out a large-scale ambush when a unit of 12 operatives emerged from a tunnel and positioned themselves near an IDF supply route waiting for an IDF convoy. The unit was reportedly heavily armed and was accompanied also by a Hamas drone. That's important because that indicates surveillance from afar, as the group was possibly attempting to coordinate this very large-scale attack. The IDF reportedly estimates that this unit was aiming to kidnap IDF soldiers after they attacked vehicles that were passing through that supply route, and that they were identified by an IDF unit shortly before a convoy was going to pass through that area. In a moment of analysis, I'm going to say that these series of operations by Hamas reflect a change in the group's activity in the southern parts of the Strip, and all demonstrate an increased amount of intelligence gathering prior to the attacks and coordination and planning among the different units. This is particularly important since this is happening in the areas of Han Yunis, which the IDF has been operating in for several months, and while the IDF has reported successes in clearing Hamas activity from those different areas, this indicates that despite that intensive military activity, the Al-Qassam brigades may have managed to regroup and reorganize themselves in some of those areas, beginning to carry out more daring operations as time goes on. Regarding casualties from the past week, the Israeli military reported that 3 IDF soldiers were killed in the Gaza Strip over the past week, bringing the total number of IDF soldiers killed in the Gaza Strip since the invasion began to 454, with 2,867 soldiers injured in the fighting in Gaza. The Palestinian Health Ministry in the Gaza Strip reported that on July 29th, the total number of Palestinians killed in the Gaza Strip since the war began crossed 60,000, and more broadly, that 697 Palestinians were killed in the Gaza Strip over the past week, bringing the total number of Palestinians killed in Gaza since the war began to 60,430, with 148,722 Palestinians reported injured in the Gaza Strip since the war began. With regards to the numbers of the Palestinian Health Ministry, it's important to remember 2 facts. 1, the Palestinian Health Ministry in the Gaza Strip does not distinguish between militants and civilians. It simply reports the entire number of Palestinian bodies that have been identified in Palestinian hospitals in the Gaza Strip. It is also important to note that according to several different estimates, both of the Palestinian Health Ministry and of different UN agencies, there are likely at least 7,000 to 10,000 more Palestinians that have been killed that are trapped under the rubbles throughout the Gaza Strip and have not been accounted for by the Palestinian Health Ministry. Looking more broadly at the IDF's activity in Gaza, there were increasing reports over the past week that the Israeli military considers itself at a crossroads at this point, with the majority of its current aims being maxed out. It's important to understand that while the Israeli military has been engaged in Gaza by now for a year and 10 months, right now the military is in control of some specific regions in the Gaza Strip. This is the southern regions of Rafah over here that are severed by the Murad corridor, the majority of the areas of Han Yunis that are severed by the Magen Oz corridor over here, as well as large parts of the northern parts of the Gaza Strip that are severed by the Netzarim corridor. At the same time, the military is not involved in active ground fighting in the areas of the Al-Mawasi refugee camp, in the central camps and areas of Deir el-Banach, and in the southern parts of the Gaza city. Those are the areas that almost the entire population of Gaza Strip, some 2 million Palestinians, are currently located in. The military's leadership reportedly stated to the Israeli government over the past week that the IDF has completed the aims of Gideon's chariots and now needs further orders, either to push forwards towards central Gaza and expand the military activity at the expense of possibly endangering the hostages that are held there, or to continue to hold positions and move towards besieging the different areas where Palestinian population is concentrated, or the military is also offering the government to come up with a different plan. This was reportedly debated on several different cabinet meetings throughout the week. However, on August 2nd, CNN reported that Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu has delayed making a decision about which way to instruct the military at this time, and that a vote on this may take place in the Israeli cabinet sometime next week. In addition to the ongoing fighting, another major development in the Gaza Strip over the past week relates to the humanitarian situation. With the increasing reports of severe hunger conditions spreading throughout the entire Gaza Strip, Israel opened up a substantial amount of new aid routes at the end of the previous week, including allowing aid paradropping missions, opening land crossings, and facilitating secure access for the United Nations to deliver aid in the Gaza Strip. On July 27th, the IDF announced that humanitarian pauses will be declared each day in the areas where the Palestinian population is concentrated. Shown in the areas illuminated in white in this map that was disseminated by the IDF, the military declared that fighting would be paused each day between the hours of 10 a.m. and 8 p.m. in the areas of the Al-Mawasi refugee camp along the coast, the central camps of Deir el-Banach and western Gaza City, in order to allow the population to have easier access to humanitarian aid in that area. On that same day, Israel also announced that it was opening the Zikim and Kerem Shalom crossings in the northern and southern parts of Gaza for the entrance of humanitarian aid, both for the UN agencies as well as to be delivered from Egypt and Jordan. And throughout the week, substantial amounts of aid paradropping missions were also carried out by Jordan, Egypt, Bahrain, the United Arab Emirates, Germany, and France. In addition, on July 30th, the IDF reported that it has begun construction on a project that is funded by the United Arab Emirates to connect a water line from a desalination plant in Egypt to the Al-Muwasi refugee camp in the Gaza Strip. This project is supposed to take several weeks, and when completed, it will reportedly be able to deliver water to some 600,000 people. Amidst these changes in the Israeli policy, Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu and the IDF spokesperson issued several statements throughout the week, each time emphasizing both that Israel is permitting a large amount of aid to come into the Gaza Strip, while also stating that the images of starvation in Gaza are manipulated and are part of Hamas propaganda, that there is no starvation that is going on in the Gaza Strip. The military also published several images and videos on July 29th and on July 30th showing armed militants taking over aid trucks in central Gaza, and Israel accused Hamas of taking over the humanitarian aid that is coming in. In turn, the Palestinian Health Ministry reported over the past week that over 40 people died of malnutrition in Gaza, bringing the total number of people that have died from malnutrition in the Gaza Strip since the war began to 169. In addition, it was reported that over 100 people were killed in the various different aid and distribution sites over the past week in the Gaza Strip, the most recent incident happening in the Nablusi region southwest of Gaza City, where 12 people were killed and 90 were injured while waiting for an aid truck. Again, at this point, it remains to be seen how much of an effect this increase will have. There is a substantial increase in the humanitarian aid that is coming into the Gaza Strip in the form of aid paradropping missions, and a substantial increase in the amount of food trucks that are coming in. However, it remains to be seen if that aid is actually distributed effectively and manages to get to the population. It also remains to be seen if those humanitarian pauses stay in effect and the population can actually get to the aid safely, if violence is kept away from the distribution sites, if the axes that the IDF said were going to be opened and secured remain open and secured. A lot of ifs. In the coming days and weeks, we will see if this actually has an effect on the situation in Gaza. Those are my highlights of the latest developments in the Israel-Hamas war. If you find these videos informative, please do remember to send them on to anyone who you think might be interested in updates on the arena. Hit that like button, subscribe, turn on notifications if you want to know when reports come out. If you have any questions or comments, feel free to leave them in the comment section below. I'm Alon Burstein. I'm a visiting assistant professor and Israel Institute fellow in the Department of Political Science at Tufts University. Thanks for watching.